At 5:20 in the afternoon on July 8, 2020, a man named Marcus stood at the edge of a wooden dock in Ventura County, California, staring at an empty stretch of water. Marcus was 62 years old, a Navy veteran who had spent the last 11 years renting pontoon boats to families at Lake Piru. He knew the rhythms of that lake better than most people know their own heartbeat. He knew when the wind picked up, usually around 2 in the afternoon. He knew when the water turned from blue to gray, usually when clouds rolled in from the west. And he knew with absolute certainty that pontoon number 14 was now 20 minutes late. The woman who rented it had signed the return slip for 4 o'clock. She had a 4-year-old boy with her. Dark hair, bright smile, sunglasses pushed up on her head. She looked familiar the way people from television sometimes do, but Marcus didn't ask. He never asked. He just handed her the keys, watched her load a cooler onto the boat, and reminded her about the life jackets. She declined one for herself, said she was a good swimmer. Marcus put one on board anyway. Now he was climbing into a staff boat, engine rumbling, scanning the northern end of the lake where most renters like to anchor. The wind had been rough that day, gusts reaching 21 miles per hour, enough to push an unanchored boat across the water like a plastic cup. When Marcus finally spotted pontoon 14 drifting near the area locals called the Narrows, he felt his stomach drop. Not because the boat was empty, because it wasn't. There was a child on board, a little boy in an orange life jacket, curled up on the vinyl seat, fast asleep. His name was Josie. He was 4 years old, and his mother was gone. Next to the boy sat an adult life jacket, dry, folded, never worn. The last photo on the missing woman's phone, recovered hours later, showed her and Josie smiling together. Timestamp: 2:37 in the afternoon, 2 hours and 43 minutes before Marcus found him alone. For anyone under 40 who grew up watching television in the 2000s, the woman's face needed no introduction. Naya Rivera wasn't just an actress. She was the voice of a generation that had never seen itself on screen before. As Santana Lopez on Glee, she played the first openly bisexual Latina character on American primetime television. By 33, she had sold millions of records, published a New York Times best-selling memoir, and was about to start filming Season 3 of Step Up High Water. But here's what most people didn't know. Lake Piru, that quiet reservoir an hour north of Los Angeles, had a history. Since 1994, at least 12 people had drowned in those waters. Some of them were wearing life jackets when they went under. The question no one in Ventura County wanted to answer was simple. What exactly lives beneath that surface? To understand what was lost that afternoon, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the lake, but to a small house in Valencia, California in January of 1987. That's when Naya Marie Rivera came into the world, the first child of George Rivera, an IT technician who bounced between jobs at Disney and Universal Music, and Yolanda Previtira, a former model turned real estate agent. The family's income rose and fell like a tide. Some years they lived comfortably, with vacations and new clothes, and a boat docked at a local marina. Other years, they struggled to keep the lights on. Naya learned early that stability was something you built yourself, not something you were handed. By the time she was 8 months old, her mother had signed her with a talent agent. By the time she was 4, she was appearing in commercials. By the time she was a teenager, she had already spent more hours on set than most adults spend in an office. But through all of it, through the auditions and callbacks and rejections, one thing remained constant: the family boat. The weekend trips to nearby lakes. And her favorite destination, the one she called her sanctuary, a quiet reservoir about an hour north of Los Angeles. Lake Piru. The role that changed everything came in 2009, when Naya was cast as Santana Lopez on a new Fox musical comedy called Glee. At first, Santana was a background character, a sharp-tongued cheerleader with a few lines per episode. But Naya brought something to the part that the writers hadn't anticipated: depth. Vulnerability beneath the sarcasm. By season 2, Santana had become one of the show's central figures, and her storyline, a young Latina woman struggling to accept her bisexuality, resonated with millions of viewers who had never seen themselves represented on television before. When Santana kissed Britney Pierce in a 2011 episode, teenagers across America watched with tears in their eyes. For many of them, it was the first time they felt seen. Naya's performance earned her multiple award nominations, magazine covers, and a place in LGBTQ television history that remains unmatched. Her duet performance of Valerie became one of the most iconic musical moments in the show's 6-season run. She wasn't just playing a character, she was giving a generation permission to exist. But fame, as it often does, came with shadows. In her 2016 memoir, Sorry Not Sorry, Naya revealed the battles she fought off-screen. Struggles with body image that started in her teens, an abortion during the filming of Glee that she kept secret from everyone except her closest friends, a relationship with co-star Mark Salling that ended badly, long before his arrest on charges that would later shock the world. She wrote about the pressure of being a Latina woman in Hollywood, the constant scrutiny, the feeling that one wrong move could end everything. Her former castmate Amber Riley would later say that Naya was the person who protected everyone on set. When things got tense, Amber recalled, Naya was always the one who stepped up. She defended the background actors. She checked on the crew. She made people feel safe. And then there was Josie Hollis Dorsey, born in September of 2015, to Naya and her husband Ryan Dorsey. In interviews, Naya called him "my greatest success" and said she would never do anything better than him. Motherhood changed her, softened some edges, sharpened others. She became fiercely protective, intensely present, determined to give her son the stability she never had as a child. On July 7, 2020, the day before she took Josie to Lake Piru, Naya posted a photo of the two of them on Twitter. The caption was simple: "Just the two of us." And 6 days before that, she had written something else. A tweet that, in hindsight, reads like a whisper from the universe. "No matter the year, circumstance, or strifes," she wrote, "every day you're alive is a blessing. Make the most of today, and every day you are given. Tomorrow is not promised." No one paid much attention to those words at the time. They would remember them later. The week that ended Naya Rivera's life began like any other summer week in Southern California. Sunny skies, warm temperatures, families looking for ways to escape the monotony of pandemic lockdowns. On Sunday, July 5, 2020, Naya was at her mother's house in Valencia, surrounded by relatives who had gathered for a small Independence Day celebration. The original plan for the following Wednesday was simple: a backyard barbecue at Yolanda's place, maybe some swimming in the pool, a lazy afternoon watching Josie play with his cousins. But somewhere between the fireworks on Saturday night and the quiet of Sunday morning, the plan changed. Josie asked if they could go to the lake instead. Not just any lake. Lake Piru, the place his mother had been visiting since she was a little girl. The reservoir she called her sanctuary. Naya said yes. She almost always said yes to Josie. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Lake Piru had only reopened 7 days earlier after being closed for months due to the pandemic. The timing felt like luck. Yolanda Previtire would later tell reporters with the kind of grief that bends a voice in half, "If I had known, I would have insisted on the barbecue. I would have done anything to keep them home." 48 hours before the lake, on Monday, July 6th, Naya sat in her living room in Los Feliz and made a video call with Derek, a producer on Step Up High Water, the television series where she played a character named Colette Jones. They talked about filming schedules, about the scenes she would shoot in August, about how excited she was for the third season. She had plans. Real plans. The kind that make you look forward to tomorrow. That night, before going to bed, she picked up her phone and searched for information about Lake Piru. She checked to see if boat rentals were available. They were. She checked to see if the recreation area was open. It was. What she didn't search for, what most people never think to search for, was the phrase, Lake Piru drowning. If she had typed those 3 words into Google, she would have found dozens of results. Stories about the 12 people who had died in those waters since 1994. Stories about the dangerous currents, the sudden drops in temperature, the underwater vegetation that could trap a swimmer like a net. But she didn't search for that. Why would she? It was just a lake. Her lake. The place where she felt safe. 24 hours before the lake, on Tuesday, July 7th, Naya posted the photo that would haunt the internet for weeks. Her and Josie, faces pressed together, sunlight catching their smiles. Just the 2 of us. That night, around 11 o'clock, she called her childhood best friend, a woman named Tamara who had known Naya since elementary school. They talked for almost an hour about nothing and everything, the way old friends do. At some point, Tamara offered to come along to the lake the next day. An extra set of hands, an extra pair of eyes on Josie. Naya declined. She wanted a day alone with her son, just the 2 of them, like the photo said. It's going to be perfect, she told Tamara before hanging up. Those were the last words Tamara would ever hear her say. On Wednesday morning, July 8th, Naya woke up early in her Los Feliz home and began preparing for the trip. She made sandwiches with cheese, packed apple juice boxes, threw in a bag of chocolate chip cookies that Josie loved. She dressed her son in blue swim trunks and rubbed sunscreen on his arms and face, the careful ritual of a mother who thinks of everything. The drive to Lake Piru takes about an hour from Los Angeles, winding through canyons and past dry hills that turn golden in the summer heat. They arrived around noon. The parking lot was half empty, a Wednesday in a pandemic, fewer families than usual. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Naya walked onto the dock and met Marcus, the man who had been renting boats at Lake Piru for over a decade. She signed the rental agreement for pontoon number 14. 3 hours on the water. Return time, 4 in the afternoon. Marcus offered her a life jacket. She said no, she was a strong swimmer. He handed her a child's vest for Josie and placed an adult vest on the boat anyway. Standard protocol. She thanked him, loaded her cooler, helped Josie aboard, and pushed off from the dock. Marcus watched them go until the boat disappeared around the bend toward the northern end of the lake. Over the next 2.5 hours, Naya and Josie did what mothers and sons do on summer afternoons. They explored the shoreline, stopped to eat their sandwiches, took photos, made video calls to family members back home. Investigators would later use the background of those FaceTime videos to map their route across the lake. By 3:30, they had reached a section called the Narrows, a narrow channel where the water is deeper and the wind funnels through the canyon walls with extra force. Sometime around 3:40, Naya ended her last video call. And then she and Josie decided to go swimming. What happened next comes from the only witness, a 4-year-old boy who would have to carry these memories for the rest of his life. Josie told investigators that he and his mother jumped into the water together. They swam for a little while, laughing, splashing. But then the boat started to drift. The engine was off, there was no anchor, and the wind that afternoon was gusting at 21 miles per hour. The pontoon floated away from them, faster than either of them expected. Naya told Josie to get back on the boat. She swam beneath him and pushed him up from below, using her hands to boost his small body onto the deck. Josie climbed aboard. He turned around to look for his mother, and that's when he saw her raise one arm into the air. He heard her shout a single word, "Help!" and then she disappeared beneath the surface of the water. Josie looked for a rope, something he could throw to her. There was nothing. He looked back at the water, calling for her, crying. But the lake was still. His mother was gone. More than an hour later, Marcus found him asleep on the drifting boat, exhausted from screaming, alone in a way no 4-year-old should ever have to be. The moment Naya Rivera slipped beneath the surface of Lake Piru, a clock started ticking that no one could see. Drowning is not like it appears in movies. There is no dramatic thrashing, no prolonged struggle visible from the surface. The human body, when deprived of oxygen, follows a brutal and efficient sequence. First comes the gasp reflex, an involuntary intake of water that floods the lungs. Then comes laryngospasm, where the throat closes to protect the airway, but by then it's already too late. The average person loses consciousness within 60 to 90 seconds of submersion. Death follows in 4 to 6 minutes. What made Lake Piru especially deadly was not just its depth, which reaches over 160 feet in some areas, but its invisible architecture. The reservoir sits in a canyon that was flooded decades ago when the Santa Felicia Dam was built, which means the bottom is not smooth sand or gentle rock. It's a maze of submerged trees, tangled vegetation, abandoned debris, and sudden drop-offs that can take a swimmer from chest-deep water to 30 feet of nothing in a single step. The water temperature is another killer. Even in July, the surface might feel warm, but a few meters down, the temperature can plunge from 77 degrees to 50 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. That kind of thermal shock causes muscles to cramp, coordination to fail, and panic to set in, even among experienced swimmers. Naya Rivera had a documented history of vertigo, a condition that worsens in cold water. The autopsy would later reveal trace amounts of prescription medication in her system, drugs for anxiety and ADHD, nothing dangerous on their own, but factors that may have affected her response to sudden physical stress. The wind that afternoon was gusting at 21 miles per hour, enough to turn the lake's surface into choppy waves and push an unanchored boat away from a struggling swimmer faster than she could chase it. Ventura County Sheriff William Ayub would later tell reporters, "We believe she mustered enough energy to save her son, but not enough to save herself." The search for Naya Rivera lasted 5 days and involved resources from across Southern California. Helicopters circled overhead with thermal cameras. Drones scanned the shoreline. Dive teams from 3 different counties took turns descending into water so murky that visibility dropped to 0 within arm's reach. Garrett, one of the lead divers on the recovery team, would later describe the conditions in an interview that made national news. "You can't see anything down there," he said. "You're feeling your way through the dark, touching things before you know what they are. We found tree branches, fishing nets, old equipment. It's like searching for a person in a flooded forest at midnight." On July 11th and 12th, Naya's family joined the search. Her mother Yolanda, her father George, her brother Michael, her ex-husband Ryan, and her close friend and former castmate Heather Morris all came to Lake Piru, standing on the shore, watching the divers emerge empty-handed again and again. The sheriff's office asked civilians to stay away, warning that the terrain around the lake was dangerous and that untrained searchers could end up needing rescue themselves. On the morning of July 13, 2020, divers found a body floating near the surface in the northeastern section of the lake, not far from where Josie had been found 5 days earlier. The depth in that area ranges from 35 to 60 feet. Authorities believe Naya's body had been trapped in underwater vegetation before finally rising to the surface. She was officially pronounced dead that afternoon. The date was not lost on anyone who remembered the tragedy that had struck the Glee family before. July 13, 2020, was exactly 7 years to the day after the death of Cory Monteith. The parallels were impossible to ignore, and the internet did not ignore them. Cory Monteith, who played Finn Hudson on Glee, was found dead in a Vancouver hotel room on July 13, 2013. He was 31 years old. Cause of death: a toxic combination of heroin and alcohol. Mark Salling, who played Noah Puckerman and had dated Naya during the show's run, was found dead on January 30, 2018. He was 35. He had hanged himself in the woods near his Los Angeles home, weeks before he was scheduled to be sentenced on charges of possessing child pornography. Now Naya, 33 years old, drowned in a lake she had loved since childhood, her body discovered on the anniversary of Cory's death. 3 main cast members, 3 deaths before the age of 36. Fans began calling it the Glee Curse, a phrase that trended on social media for days. And then someone remembered the song. In the episode that paid tribute to Cory Monteith, titled The Quarterback, Naya Rivera's character Santana Lopez performed a heartbreaking rendition of If I Die Young by the band Perry. The lyrics include the lines, "Sink me in the river at dawn, send me away with the words of a love song." Naya sang those words while mourning her fictional friend. 7 years later, she drowned in a California lake. Coincidence? Probably. But coincidence has a way of feeling like something else entirely when the details line up this precisely. What made the tragedy even harder to accept were the questions that followed. Lake Piru was the only lake in Ventura County that allowed swimming, despite having one of the highest drowning rates in the region. Documents obtained through public records requests revealed that since 1994, local officials had received at least 8 formal petitions asking for warning signs to be installed around the lake. Every single one was denied, most often citing budget constraints. Travis, a former lifeguard supervisor for Ventura County beaches, spoke to reporters after Naya's death with barely contained frustration. "Anyone who knows Piru knows the risks," he said. "Whirlpools near the dam, cross-currents in the Narrows, water temperature that drops without warning. Why weren't there visible warnings? That's a question the county needs to answer." The wrongful death lawsuit filed by Naya's family and ex-husband Ryan Dorsey pulled back the curtain even further. Internal emails from the company that managed the lake showed discussions about liability exposure in the event of a drowning. 3 weeks before Naya rented pontoon number 14, an inspector had recommended that all rental boats be equipped with mandatory anchors to prevent them from drifting away from swimmers. The recommendation was never implemented. If Marcus had been told to insist on the life jacket, if the boat had come with an anchor, if there had been signs posted at the dock explaining the dangers beneath the surface. How many small failures have to accumulate before a Wednesday afternoon boat ride turns into a national tragedy? Ventura County eventually settled the lawsuit for an undisclosed amount. Lake Piru now permanently prohibits swimming, but the families of the 12 people who drowned before Naya Rivera never received a public apology. Their names are not on any memorial. Their deaths did not change policy. It took a celebrity to make the county act, and even then, it was too late. On the afternoon of July 13, 2020, hours after Naya Rivera's body was recovered from Lake Piru, a photograph was taken that would become one of the most powerful images of that year. The surviving members of the Glee cast, Heather Morris, Amber Riley, Kevin McHale, Jenna Ushkowitz, and Chris Colfer, stood together on the shore of the lake, holding hands, staring out at the water that had taken their friend. No one spoke. No cameras were invited. Someone captured the moment from a distance, and it spread across the internet within hours. For millions of people who had grown up watching Glee, who had seen themselves in Santana Lopez for the first time, who had cried when she kissed Brittany and cheered when she came out to her grandmother, that image was the end of something. Not just a life, but an era. In a year already defined by catastrophic loss, by a pandemic that had isolated the world, and a series of tragedies that seemed never to stop, the death of Naya Rivera struck a chord that resonated far beyond Hollywood. Google would later report that she was the 8th most searched topic of 2020. News outlets in Australia and New Zealand called her "drowning," the most chilling celebrity death of the year. Shai, her ex-fiancé, the rapper Big Sean, posted a tribute on Instagram that called her a hero, referring both to her cultural impact and to the fact that she had saved her son's life in her final moments. "She was a beautiful soul," he wrote, "and she gave representation to so many people who needed it." The legacy Naya Rivera left behind continues to grow. Latino and LGBTQ organizations across the country have established scholarships and programs in her name. The Naya Rivera Memorial Fund raises money for water safety education, an effort that feels both necessary and painfully ironic given the circumstances of her death. Lake Piru now has warning signs posted along its shore, signs that were requested for decades and denied until a famous woman drowned. Legislation nicknamed Naya's Law has been proposed in California, a bill that would require mandatory life jacket use at all public lakes in the state. As of today, it has not been passed. The bureaucracy moves slowly, even when the stakes are measured in human lives. But perhaps the most enduring part of Naya's legacy is not a law or a fund or a memorial. It is the generation of young people, now in their 20s and 30s, who saw Santana Lopez on their television screens and understood for the first time that they were allowed to exist, that their identity was not a secret to be ashamed of, but a truth to be spoken out loud. Naya gave them that. No one can take it away. Josie Hollis Dorsey is 9 years old now. He lives with his father Ryan and his aunt Nikayla, Naya's younger sister, who moved in to help raise him after the tragedy. Ryan Dorsey posted on Instagram several months after Naya's death, his words heavy with the kind of grief that never fully lifts. "It's still hard to believe," he wrote, "but having our son makes everything more bearable." Josie knows what happened at the lake. He knows that his mother pushed him onto that boat. He knows that she shouted for help. He knows that she disappeared. What he will carry with him for the rest of his life is the knowledge that in her final conscious moments, Naya Rivera made a choice. She chose him. And now, all these threads come together. The tweet from 6 days before, the one that said, "Tomorrow is not promised." The adult life jacket sitting dry and folded on the boat. The 12 drowning victims who came before, whose deaths changed nothing until a celebrity joined their number. The song Naya sang at Cory Monteith's memorial, "If I Die Young," with its haunting lyrics about being laid to rest in water. The fact that her body was found exactly 7 years after his, on the same calendar date, as if the universe were underlining a connection no one wanted to see. You can call it coincidence. You can call it tragedy. You can call it a curse. But whatever you call it, you cannot call it random. There are too many patterns, too many echoes, too many moments that feel like warnings no one heard until it was too late. What happened in the minutes between Naya's cry for help and the silence that followed? Lake Piru keeps that secret. The water does not give interviews. The vegetation does not testify. All we know is what a 4-year-old boy saw and what the evidence suggests. A mother exhausted from pushing her child to safety, struggling against currents and cold and a drifting boat. A body surrendering to physics. A life ending in the same lake where it had found so much peace. But here is what we also know. In those final seconds, when her muscles were failing and her lungs were burning and the surface was slipping further away, Naya Rivera did not panic for herself. She made sure her son was safe. She gave him everything she had left. That is not an accident. That is not a tragedy. That is a choice. The choice of a mother who loved her child more than her own survival. And maybe that is the only answer we will ever get.